Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the panel discussion on Can Media Play a Role in Promoting Regional Understanding. This session was supposed to be moderated by Honorable Member of Parliament Dr. Chandan Mitra. He's on his way. So for the time being, I'll request Brigadier Rumil Dahiya, Deputy Director General of IDSA, to conduct the discussion. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have had very useful discussions over the period of last 2 days. And this last session is the crux of all that. Can the media really play a constructive role in promoting regional understanding? I stand in for Mr. Chandan Mitra, who will be here in a few minutes. He's stuck up in the traffic. But keeping in view the value of your time, I think we'll start the session right away. And for this, we have a very distinguished panel. The bio is given in the book that has been given to you, so I won't waste time on that. And to start off the discussion, can I request my friend Nitin Gokhale to give his views on the subject. Over to you, Nitin.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, IDSA, for inviting me here. The topic is that can media play a role in promoting understanding in the region, in South Asia region. Certainly it can play a role, but has it played the role is the question. And unfortunately the answer is, to my mind at least, we haven't played the role that should be there. We, at least in India, I can say with honorable exceptions, we seem to know more about the US and perhaps the UK in the olden days than our neighbors. We don't know much about what's happening in Myanmar, what is Myanmar all about, what is Bangladesh, what is Bhutan, and rightly so. I think our friends from all these countries, I heard them sporadically yesterday and today, have that complaint or observation that India doesn't care about its neighbors until the Prime Minister goes there or until there's some trouble. For instance, in Bhutan, you'll only find headlines in Indian media when there is the kerosene subsidy being withdrawn, or when the Prime Minister, then Prime Minister, goes to Rio and speaks to the Chinese on the sidelines. We haven't gone deeper into it. One, of course, in the current scenario, I think the shrinking budgets and also the lack of understanding about the region itself in the newsrooms in general. We are overly obsessed with Pakistan, and that's the reality in the country, in the strategic community, as well as in the newsrooms, that anything, even the smallest thing in Pakistan would be a headline in at least the English language media. China is just beginning to become a matter of interest to the Indian media, really. So we know very little about each other, really. We are trapped in stereotypes. When it comes to Bangladesh, it has to be either a fight between the two Begums or some influx stories from northeast when there is some trouble. About Bhutan, I think friend Dawa has already mentioned what kind of stories come from Bhutan. So what should we do to overcome these shortcomings? I mean, I can go on and on about how illiterate we are about our neighbors and how we treat the countries around us without any information, without any insights. But all that has been said, so I don't want to get into that. What I would suggest, and as a matter of personal experience and personal visits that I have had to all these countries, be it Sri Lanka or to Bangladesh, and reported from there or from Bhutan or from Myanmar. I must tell my friends from Myanmar that I took a holiday in September to Myanmar, and I really was besotted with that country. I had traveled from Tamu to Kelemo earlier in 2004 by road, but I wanted to see the rest of the country, so I went to Bagan, I went to Inle, I went to Myo Lwin, I went to Mandalay and to Yangon, and I must say that this country is on the cusp of big changes, and many congratulations for that. I'm sure the media will also keep pace with what's happening around the country itself. Having said that, I think what we need to do to promote understanding about each other is to have more exchanges of media personnel from each other. I don't know whether the government will promote it, or should the media organizations and media associations should do it. But more exchanges, more visas freely available to media. I had trouble in getting, incidentally, a visa to Myanmar. They said that, I'm sorry, your passport says media, and so we'll have to refer it back to the headquarters. Fortunately, they didn't find anything adverse, and so they allowed me to go. And we had a wonderful holiday there. But more visas are required, more freely and more frequently. Perhaps the other thing, apart from physical travel to each other's countries, is to have cross-posting of articles, or cross-posting of views, which Badrul Hassan used to do for Indian Express, I think. You still do. He writes, or they take his articles, or somebody else writes from here in other newspapers. Maybe just a free exchange of a kind of a reciprocal arrangement from various newspapers about each other. Maybe even share our stories on television, video stories or video footage that we must do. Otherwise, what is happening is we tend to be very episodic in our coverage about each other, be it Sri Lanka, be it Bangladesh, be any of these countries. So therefore, more exchanges, more dialogues like this, more information, and maybe something that has an institutional backing. More organizations like IDSA and similar organizations and think tanks in other countries may take the initiative to really have more exchanges and more visas and more cross-postings of articles. I remember the Statesman in its heydays used to have this pool of, or it still has, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, of articles coming from various newspapers in various countries. They all used to come and they used to print each other's articles. So maybe that is one way of promoting understanding about each other. And let's not get trapped into stereotypes. The jingoistic narrative that many speakers spoke about is a byproduct of the closeness with which we work with foreign policy and defense establishments. I may be also guilty of that in some cases. But going beyond that, I think we need to promote our own understanding within the media circles to get neutral, or maybe get the other side of the story, rather than just sticking to one kind of a narrative from this side of the border, criticizing or trying to interfere, like somebody put it, into the foreign policy or into the national policy of a smaller country or a neighbor. So I think I'll not take much of your time. We can have, it's more interactive is better. So as a last thought, I will leave you with a thought that if we have more exchanges within ourselves, between ourselves and between newspapers and other media organizations, informally as well as through think tanks and through governments, I think we would do ourselves a greater service to understand what the region is all about. We are in a very exciting region, volatile, of course, lots of problems, poverty-stricken, all that we know. But we are also on the cusp of big changes in this Indian subcontinent, and sometimes even that this term is also objected to, Indian subcontinent. Maybe South Asia is a better term, but certainly we need more exchanges and more views like this and more conferences like this. So I'll stop here, and then we can take question answers later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nitin. I'm Chandan Mitra. I'm sorry I'm late, but I'll take over at this point, and I don't want to waste any further time because I'm told our Pakistani friends have to catch a flight or leave a bit early. So may I now call upon Professor Rasul Baksh Rais to speak first. We'll be followed by Syed Badrul Ansari. Yes.
Honorable Chandra Mitra Saab, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I have been drafted to this role because of absence of our compatriot, Mr. Saleem Safi. On the subject, I personally am very, very pessimistic about media, and I'm looking at Pakistan in particular. Why I'm pessimistic? I think we are putting too much hope in media, that media alone can promote understanding among societies across the border, among citizens. Our emphasis should be somewhere on the state and those who hold powers. If they take right decisions in creating stable, peaceful, harmonious environment within the region, things will begin to change. And also, I think we are giving too much perceptual power to the media, that media can do this, media can do that. There is only so much that the media can really undermine peace or promote peace. It has limited capacity or limited power, because we are making an assumption that that perhaps those who are anchors are the guests and the questions and what goes on in the media, the whole world is actually watching them in the first place, and at the same time considers them very credible and believes in their story or the views that they express. And also we are making a wrong assumption about the citizens, the audience, the viewers, that they are perhaps not intelligent enough and they can be manipulated very easily by the false stories or by the views. I think the important thing is, if we have to consider the role of the media, the important thing is that the media, and particularly electronic media, where the focus appears to be, is very young. It is just 10 or 15 years old. And many of very important positions are occupied by young journalists, or by those who are never journalists in their last incarnation. So they are there because of connections, they are there because they have been pushed into that. They are there not because actually they want to adopt it as a profession. In most of the cases, they have come from the print media. And I don't think that many of them are really trained as media persons or journalists. So therefore, in a young media where you are competing channels and they are dying for rating, they will continue to say things. And some of the issues that many panelists across South Asian countries have brought are very true in Pakistan, that they want to say things which are sensational, and where they demonize certain parties, certain individuals, certain countries, and they will continue to do it. I think we have to bear with that. And the immediate sense, I always advise people who are very unhappy, sad, and I detect the source of their unhappiness. I say that if you are reading newspapers, or if you're watching TV, please stop doing it. Read some book or take a hike. You will be a happy person. What we can actually do is three things I think very important. One is that columnists in India who write about South Asian issues, and even about India, they should get published in Pakistani newspapers. They should get published in Sri Lankan newspapers. And it's happening. There are 2 or 3 who write very, very, very frequently from India. Jawad Naqvi and Priful Bidwai. There are 2, and there is another person, I forgot his name. He writes weekly column for the dance economic section of the newspaper every week, and that is about Indian economy, and we are very much interested what is happening in India. If there are more columnists writing in the print media, and also if there are more Indians and Pakistanis who are not really shouted down, but there is a very, very civilized exchange of ideas on talk shows in India where Pakistanis participate. And I think we have to develop that culture of mutual respect. It doesn't happen on Pakistani television talk shows. I don't think it is happening on Indian television talk shows where you are shouted down, and you don't see others' views being respected as the person at that and being respected. More people, more frequent, I think, participation on issues which divide us, and where we have not only the representations of the governments, but representations of the civil society, people who can stand out and express themselves freely, and they are not attached or affiliated with any political party, and speak with the spirit of harmony and goodness and proper understanding of others. Second, I think important thing is that that this is a very unique kind of workshop or seminar or conference, that on such subject, media promoting peace and harmony and understanding regional stability, we need to have workshops that are attended and participated by and organized by media outlets, by media organizations. So if you look at here, there are, of course, journalists, but I think such kind of workshops we need to hold across South Asian country, and there can be a major project. I think there will be a lot of donors from within the region and outside the regions. And with a focus of 5 years or 10 years, at least 3 to 5 years, that we are going to create a fraternity of journalists who are trained and who are oriented towards understanding of the society rather than saying things without knowing anything about that country. That you're not really a superficial expert, but really you understand that society, and then you talk about that society and things happening in that society with some knowledge and with some understanding. And understanding doesn't also means that you take others' point of view. You are sympathetic, and you empathize. You also look at their situation, that how they feel about it. The workshops and the last thing that I would like to say is that promoting understanding, how not to promote misunderstanding. That is extremely important. I think first we have to prevent this negativity. And I see a lot of negativity. I must say that the perception in Pakistan about Indian electronic media is that it is overly anti-Pakistan. It demonizes Pakistan. And then it generates a debates among Pakistanis in the media that, look, you know how jingoistic and how anti-Pakistan Indian media are, and you are so soft on India. You also get into that kind of fist fighting. So I think how not to promote misunderstanding. It comes with professional integrity and responsibility, and I assume that journalists in India and also in Pakistan have that. I cannot doubt anybody's integrity or honesty about that. But with kind of a conventional humanism and a spirit for humanity and for society, and with responsibility, that what we are saying does not hurt others, but rather helps others. But in order to cultivate that person in the media will take some time. Thank you very much for inviting me to share my thoughts.
Syed Badrul Ahsan, yes, he's sitting right here. Ahsan sahab.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think over the last couple of days, yesterday and today, we have discussed a whole lot of issues relating to South Asia. And as a beginning to my talk today, this small, speech you might call it, the first thing I'd like to say, I was just telling a couple of my friends over at tea break, I wish 1947 had not happened. And then another point I raised a few years ago, I came to Calcutta. I frequently come to Calcutta because I happened to have my in-laws in Calcutta. So I asked this immigration official at Calcutta airport, why do I have to you're a Bengali, I'm a Bengali, why do I have to get a visa to come to Calcutta? And he also gave me a wonderful little smile. He says, Dada, 1947 সালে ছোট্ট একটা কিছু ঘটেছিল. In 1947, a little something happened. And we left it at that. So that's, it's unfortunate that we happen to be part of a world which has got divided. Here, you see, when I come to Delhi, I see the focus is always on India and Pakistan. Naturally, because, you have the Punjab here, Western Punjab and Eastern Punjab. when I go to Calcutta, the focus is on West Bengal and Bangladesh. So it's very uplifting when people talk about their commonalities. At the same time, it's very tragic when you remember what happened, say, the great Calcutta killings in 1946, 1947, etc. But right now, at this point in time, the wonderful thing is, say, in South Asia, all of these countries represented here today have democracy. See, we don't have a single state. See, in Myanmar, Bangladesh, Pakistan, these three states particularly, we don't have military rule. So we have democracy. In Bangladesh, we have elected government. India, you had a wonderful election recently. Pakistan, say, we were in Bangladesh, we were very worried that Nawaz Sharif might be toppled by Imran Khan and Tahirul Qadri. That has not happened. We are very happy. So whatever our political differences, ideological differences, we would like to see democracy stay on in Pakistan, everywhere, in fact. So having said that, say, we say about the role of the media. What can the media do? Well, the media is not a state player. The media can only suggest, but on its own, the media can come to terms with certain realities on the basis of pragmatism. Say, despite our political differences, our philosophical differences in all these three countries, say, in Pakistan you have a Muslim League government, in India you have a BJP government, in Bangladesh we have a putatively secular Awami League government. So apart from all that, I think we in the media, we need to be liberal, see, pragmatic, and without prejudice as far as links among these countries in the region are concerned. So first of all, we have to come out of our narrow prejudices, because the media in all these three countries must understand certain realities and country perspectives. When I write in Bangladesh for my newspaper about the Tista Waters issue, as a journalist, it should also be my job to understand the other point of view. See, and similar is the case for a journalist in India. So because I've seen on issues relating to on bilateral issues particularly, say we've been using the term jingoism frequently. That keeps happening. See, I have friends in the Bangladesh media who will tell you that the Indians are taking away our water. They won't give us any water. And then again, these days, of course, the focus has shifted from a perceived hostility to Bangladesh's interest in Delhi to very clear hostilities in Calcutta, because people thought Mamata Banerjee had come to power, so she's a Bengali, she's a woman, we have a woman prime minister, we have all women in positions of power or out of power in Bangladesh. But then that has not happened. So for us, for journalists, see, we should focus on these issues in a bilateral, in a way that convinces you that we understand the other side of the issue too. Say, I will not write about, say, my interests only, but then let's have the other point of view also. And it's very important that the media in our countries, different countries, our 8 SARC countries, they should not be seen to be the voice of the establishment or as a tool of government. That is a very dangerous thing to do. Say in Bangladesh, again, since I come from there, one of the cornerstone of our foreign policy, which again, personally to me and to a whole lot of other people, is pretty unrealistic. In the beginning, it was given out that Bangladesh's foreign policy is based on the principle of friendship for all and malice towards none. The friendship for all, that's fine. Malice towards none, see, you can't be friendly with everybody, but then you have to be pragmatic. See, and malice towards none, no malice at all. But foreign policy should be based on the questions of enlightened national self-interest. Beyond that, also look at the interest of the other country. Then we have there are certain areas where we need to, within the region, we have to be very clear about what the media can do. The state is there. The state will always be there. It's very often an obstructive factor. But then take the case of ULFA leader Anup Chetia. He has been in Bangladeshi in a Bangladeshi jail for years, and he should have been handed over to India a long time ago. Now that has not been done. Why it has not been done is for the government to say. But in the media, we should be focusing on it here as well as in Bangladesh. Then this morning, the news, one of the latest news items is about the anti-Bangladesh activities or this JMB activities in West Bengal. So these are again issues that are being focused on, which is a very good thing. Indian newspapers are carrying it, and we're also sometimes reproducing excerpts from these Indian reports. That should be done. The point here is fanaticism in all aspects, in all forms, throughout the subcontinent, throughout South Asia. Asia must be confronted, and we should call a spade a spade. In Bangladesh, for example, in India, whenever I've visited India over the last 3 years, at seminars like this, I was asked a question. No one asked me this question here yesterday or today. See, but the question is, why is the Hindu population declining in Bangladesh? Which is true. At the time of partition, we had 35% of the population in Bangladesh. Then East Bengal or East Pakistan, it was 35%. By the time 1971, the War of Liberation came around, it had gone down to 29%. And today, in an independent Bangladesh, where we are supposed to have a secular democracy, a country for all people, for all Bengalis, because we do not call ourselves a Muslim country, although Western nations, Western ambassadors, they sometimes are very condescending. They try to portray us. They even tell us that we're happy that you're a moderate Muslim nation. No, we are not a moderate Muslim nation. We are not a Muslim nation at all. We are a Bengali nation. After that, we are Muslims, Hindus, whatever. So today the population, the Hindu population has come down to less than 10%. We need to talk about that. You talk about it, you raise this question. Back home in Bangladesh, we need to talk about that. But very few journalists have written about it. I don't know why, whether they're kowtowing to the establishment, that is for them to deal with. Then the question of the influx of Bengalis into Assam, that is one area, one issue we have denied over the years. Now you can't go on denying facts all your life, but thankfully the media, sections of the media in Bangladesh have picked up the subject and are actually acknowledging the fact that there has been an influx of Bengalis into Assam and problems are being created there. And apart from that, so these are the basics. And again, I've been talking about India, Pakistan. Now, about Pakistan and Bangladesh, obviously there are sensitivities involved here because of 1971. We were one country, same country. But then again, you will notice that anywhere you go, whenever a Bengali, a Bangladeshi, and a Pakistani meet, it's with a kind of wariness. They exchange, they're very polite towards each other. But then, that terrible legacy of 1971 is there. But then this is also an area where we could talk about things. For example, I've seen, on a few years ago, in 2010, if I remember, there are discussions on Pakistani Geo television channel. They call it in Urdu, Sakute Dhaka, so the fall of Dhaka. So, and there were articles in Bangladesh's newspapers on why, how Bangladesh came into being, emerged in December 1971. In Pakistani newspapers, it's exactly the opposite. So we need to talk about it. So we can understand their sensitivities are there. We're not denying them. Our sensitivities are there. So all these things should be discussed openly by the media, because the state will not discuss it. Now you may have diplomatic relations. We have our High Commissioner in Islamabad. Pakistan has its High Commissioner in Dhaka, but then the interaction is not there because of these sensitivities involved. So we need to face the issues, and the only way these issues can be faced is to talk about them openly in the media. And then again, the media in South Asia should also be focusing on another area which we seem to have missed out, the growing Chinese influence in the area. Now that is, a lot of people, there are people in my country, in fact, one intellectual, he calls himself a leftist, but then last year he was on the side of the rightists who tried to topple the government. So Farhad Mazhar, his name is. So he once wrote an article that the only way for Bangladesh to confront India is to develop friendship with China. That sounded more like a throwback to the 1960s. When during the war, 65 and 71, during the war, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto went to China and sought Chinese help. They thought the Chinese would come and prevent the rise of Bangladesh. So that's it, and I'll come to the end of it. So finally, we need to, as one of my friends pointed out here, Mr. Rais, we need to have articles, we need to have comments, from each other's country publish in newspapers so that you have a country perspective of what's happening. See, Indian journalist doesn't know what's happening. See, and last year at JNU, I was asked to deliver a talk on Bangladesh's history since 1971, and I did. And I was quite surprised at the end of the session. A lot of these young people, and even their teachers, they said, we didn't know what had happened. We know what happened till 1971, or maybe up to 1975 when Sheikh Mujibur Rahman was assassinated. But beyond that, we don't know. The question is, why don't you know? Or why don't I know what's happening here? So these media exchanges, articles, news items, other forms of communication, especially steered by the media, should be there. So these country perspectives there. And finally, the one point is, the last thing is, in journalism, see, let us have good cooperative journalism. See, we'll promote our own interests, country interests, but at the same time, we'll not be we refuse to be jingoistic. We will not have what we call adversarial journalism. So that's cooperative enterprise is what we need at this point. Thank you, sir.
May I, I'm told our Afghan colleague also has to leave a little earlier than the others. So, although this is not the best possible order, but still I think I will now call on Mr. Amrullah Saleh, who's from Afghanistan, and I invite you to take the forum, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chair. I borrow a quote from the presentation of Mr. Kunda Dixit yesterday, where he said, but I changed it a little bit. He said, when and if the mainstream media lies, the social media comes to our rescue. That is very true and applicable to the situation in Afghanistan, where monopoly of news has ended with entry of Facebook, Twitter, and other social media tools in my country. And also monopoly of lie has ended, because if they do lie, these social media tools will enable the population to break the news in their own way. Afghanistan today has, with the population of in and around 25 million people, the Ministry of Communication of Afghanistan say they have sold about 16 million SIM cards. So a big part of our population, they have access to means of communication. Also, I borrow another quote from Mr. Gunas Reka from Bangladesh, who said, Sri Lanka, who said there is mass communication and also there is segmentation and fragmentation of the communication, and I call it community communication. So again, that applies very much to my country, where national news is no longer the only news. We have subnational news, we have provincial news, we have district news. And if the national news doesn't appeal and have relevance to the lives of communities at subnational level, they ignore it. So media in today's life in Afghanistan plays a very, very vital role, and I don't want to repeat what I said yesterday. But in two areas, the national news in Afghanistan is the most dominating one, which is on the issue of security and foreign policy. So Afghans across the country stick to the national narrative when it comes to foreign policy and when it comes to security. And those within those two themes, Taliban and Pakistan dominate our debate. Terrorism and Taliban and the insurgency and sanctuaries across the border, they dominate our themes, and roundtable discussions and talk shows and etc. etc. as our distinguished Pakistani friends said yesterday, they have their own narrative and we have our own narrative. Since 1965, the Kabul and Islamabad have many times issued joint communiques, statements. They have even signed memorandums of agreements, trying to calm down the anti-this, anti-that propaganda, or cool down the media against each other, but it has not worked because media by itself is not a force to perpetuate either friendship or animosity. There has to be triggers. There has to be people at the decision-making level to use the media as a tool to foster either friendship or other agenda. Despite the massive interaction between the two peoples, I totally echo what the Pakistani scholar Mr. Rais said. We have tens of thousands of Afghans crossing the border going to Pakistan, but it does not change the perception. The perception is, yes, we do need Pakistan, yes, Pakistan needs us, but the security problem remains the same. Coming to India and this particular conference, what I observed since yesterday is India has gained a centrality in the perceptions and in reality in the South Asia. By virtue of its wealth, by virtue of its military power, by virtue of its need for energy, India cannot remain a status quo power. They have to have quest for friendship. They have to have quest for alliance. And Afghanistan is a has signed a strategic partnership with India, which envisions close cooperation in the area of defense, economy, energy, etc., etc. India's entertainment industry in my country is very attractive. It's very popular. And Indian cinema names and even people in Afghanistan. But India's media is not parallel with India's entertainment industry in Afghanistan. We hardly hear deep analysis or news from Indian outlets about our country or the situation as a whole. As far as I remember, in the past several years, there are a couple of indie TV documentaries on situation in Afghanistan, a few in-depth interviews with Afghan decision makers and policy makers. With all the knowledge that is in India, we are not seeing that knowledge reflected in India's media about Afghanistan. We find Indian columnists, we find Indian writers and authors to be very, very well informed. They have access to tens of thousands of Afghans who travel to India, and many thousand Afghans study today here in Indian universities. But we hardly see a lot coming out in the print media or in TV. So that is not suiting, it's not compatible with centrality of India's role in South Asia. While India is so much in lead in many other areas, when it comes to its media and its focus on Afghanistan, it's lagging behind. So at the end, I want to outline our expectation. What is our expectation? The expectation is if misunderstanding is a problem, if terrorism is a problem, if injustice of history is a problem, and if we have other problems, trans-border crime and other things, we do not have a common counter-narrative. So there is need for such exchanges to take place more frequently and more regularly at a strategic level. So the aim should be, if possible, over the years, maybe in a decade time, the region should have a common strategic community who will have the same perspective, who will share the same views on challenges and problems that we all face as peoples of this region, chiefly today: terrorism, militancy, sectarianism, and exclusion. Some people call it rights of minorities, etc., etc. We lack that type of, at least when it comes to the media, a visible and solid common narrative. Media is helping us in a lot of other ways in Afghanistan too. A month or so ago, the Taliban spokesperson posted the Eid greeting of his leader, Mullah Omar, on his Twitter, and he had forgotten to disable the location feature, and it said Karachi, which became a good news for all of us. So they are using it. The other side is also using it. We are also using it, and it has, as I said, for Afghanistan, our parliamentarians and our commentators, they love to repeat a phrase. They say media is the fourth pillar of our state. It is so strong in Afghanistan today that it is media a lot of times which bring accountability, which brings the truth to the surface, and it has reached a threshold as far as the society is concerned, that any type of political fluctuation in Afghanistan will find it extremely, extremely difficult to reverse the achievement that we have in the area of free media and private media. With that, I once again thank IDSA and the management for their excellent arrangements and for their generosity and hospitality, and for all of you for listening to our presentation. Thank you.
Small things that we tend to ignore, and it's very right that the Indian media has not really made the kind of effort that it can and should be doing with regard to Afghanistan. Despite our long association, despite the fact that so many Afghan people are living in India or studying in India, I think our lack of knowledge about modern Afghanistan is truly appalling. And I thank you for reminding us of the importance of this. So after comments from Pakistan, Bangladesh and Afghanistan, now I call upon Professor D Muni to deliver his perspectives on the subject.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not a media man. I don't know the intricacies of the industry or instrument, whatever you call it. But I'll have some hodgepodge of 2, 3, 4 comments based largely on my impression of this conference and largely also on the broad subject, not very specific, not very nuanced. To begin with, the question of this session, I think Nitin has beautifully answered. Media can play a role, media must play a role, but media has not played a role. And I find that even in our conference, there was absolutely fascinating presentations on media in South Asian countries, how they are doing, what their dynamics is. There was some peripheral comments on regional relations. India-Pakistan, India-Afghanistan, India-Bangladesh, India-Nepal. Not on the region. We did not have in anywhere a kind of a composite view of it. Why it happened, I can't say, though the theme was very loud and clear as to media's role on regional understanding. I'm a bit surprised by the absence of one name, by and large. I mean, it was uttered by one or two persons. The name is called SAFMA, South Asian Association of South Asian Free Media Association. And Mr. Imtiaz Ahmed played a magnificent role, along with many of the Indians, to build in the media a huge constituency of South Asian regionalists. He held conferences. Even today he has an excellent web page. The SAFMA has an excellent president is these days Vinod, I think. It's even earlier Mr. Katyal were very deeply involved. And nobody mentioned to this as to what is the role which SAFMA has played in promoting, not promoting, defining, deciphering the regional perspective from media's point of view. Therefore, I was thinking for 2 days, where does the problem lie? And to my mind, and I may be wrong, the problem lies in, do we really have regional understanding as a theme in our priorities? In terms of foreign policies, in terms of corporate interests, in terms of social sector, whether we have a priority. I would say, and I talk about India, let me not go into other countries, but I'll have some reflection on that. India's policy did not evolve in a regional context. It evolved country to country. We had relations for a very, very long time. But India is changing. And India started changing with the beginning of this century. Certainly by 2004, even at the official level it was announced that India wants neighbors to share into its growth, its prosperity, its dynamism, whatever else it is. So the policy has been changing, and now the Indian policy makers, and the best evidence was Mr. Modi's invite to his inauguration to all the South Asian countries, that India cannot do in the world without taking neighbors along. Therefore, the message now is loud and clear that India will have to be regional in the sense of taking the neighbors along while doing various other things individually. Now, do all other countries have the same feeling? Do they really want to relate, associate, integrate with India? And we had this question in the previous session. Deepak Bhattrai, Adhikari, very articulately talked about the anti-Indian nationalism in Nepal. If the countries have identified themselves as being distanced from India, the question of promoting a push towards India faces a lot of hurdles and problems at almost every level. Therefore, this is one of the major problems. Even when nationalism is not defined in Indian terms in the neighborhood, I find that the political polarization in all the neighboring countries is such where India is a major dividing factor. Some parties, some stakeholders would stand up and say we are with India, others would say no, we are not with India. Now it is in this case, because media functions on all these, that's why I'm trying to identify that this is what it is there. Look at the stakeholders. I said the states are the principal stakeholders. even in driving and moving media. One telephone call, we kind of, like on LOC, we have had debates, or on Nepal, whenever there is a controversy, we have a debate. Bangladesh, we have a controversy, we have a debate. One telephone call, either from MEA or PMO, to the Indian television channels, to the Indian media, will do a lot, stir them up on that issue. So state is a major stakeholder in what policy has to be projected. The question arises that when a state is promoting regionalism, media will play a positive role. But in circumstances where a state is not quite committed to it, will media stand up? And that's a major problem, and I'll tell you one personal experience. 1992, after the Babri Masjid, Narasimha Rao said we will not go to Bangladesh for the summit. SAARC summit was to be hit because Narasimha Rao said we will not go to Bangladesh. What was the reason? The reason was security of the Prime Minister, which obviously is the responsibility of the host country to a very large extent. And we also carry our own security. That was not the problem. The problem was that there were a lot of support for a lot of opposition to what happened in India, and the whole atmosphere was vitiated in one way or the other. I got a telephone call from H.K. Dua, and he said, write an article. And I wrote a devastating article on Mr. Narasimha Rao not going to Bangladesh. And I know I was pulled up by MEA, I was pulled up with various people, doesn't matter. But that was the courage of the media to say that what you have done in regional context is not correct. Now I want to see media courage in such instances where the stakeholders are taking a line which is not in conformity with regional understanding, not in conformity with promoting or building regional understanding. And this could be states, this could be corporate and business circles. I give you an example how business circles are also interested when their interests converge with the regional understanding. Modi Xerox, in 1987, I was teaching in JNU, and they said, please write an article on SAARC and see how it can be done. I said, how the hell are you interested? And they said, we want to sell Modi Xerox in China via Pakistan. So we want to see this trade relationship building up. So you have corporate interest, you have security establishments which have interest in building regional security at times and in not building regional security at times. So the question I am posing before media is how much courage we have to stand up at a time when the stakeholders, be it a state, be it corporate sector, be it religious groups, be it other social constituencies, when they say that, look, this is not the time or this is the time to abuse the neighbor, or this is the time to ignore the regional constituencies, how much of this has been done? My last point, very briefly, is that I find there is, yes, a lot of corporatization of media has taken place, and we have talked about it. But earlier they were, at least in India, they were editors, Girilal Jain, Nikhil Chakravarti, H.K. Dua, George Verghese, Indra Malhotra, and others which I know, Marvin De Silva, Khalid Ahmed now in Pakistan. There may be many others which I don't recall their names right now, who had a certain emotional, certain ideological commitment to building regional understanding of various types. They worked individually with the countries, they worked at the regional context. After corporatization, I don't see such band of editors who are committed to this idea or who are inclined to this idea and who push. You know, they are all kind of, we had some of the observations on the commentaries to be written. Today you write a commentary on the SAARC, which is, or regional understanding, which is more positive and not very sensational or sexy, nobody would carry it, perhaps. They used to telephone people and ask them to write. So this is how this whole thing was. Now this commercialization has done some positive things, no doubt. Aman Ki Asha we talked about yesterday, or in case of Bangladesh, the initiative which has been started. Not only that, I mean, I don't find why this phenomenon is not spreading. Like some of the Indians have invested in media in the neighboring countries. The Himalayan Times, or which you have in Nepal. Why not more of this is taking place? Why not more of this is taking place from neighbors into India? We were only talking about stationing of the correspondents. Isn't it amazing that India does not have media correspondents from all the neighboring countries? Isn't it amazing that India does not have correspondents in all the neighboring countries? But this is a fact of life. And unless you think people are moved into this direction, we probably will have 6 other seminars on regional understanding. Unless the stakeholders in regional understanding are stirred up, mobilized, if not pressurized, persuaded, I don't think we will reach much of it. And there is no point in, yes, we have found the limitations and faults of media, but there are red lines beyond which media with all kind of commitment and dedication would not be able to cross those red lines unless there are stakeholders pushing them. Thank you very much.
Mr. Muni, as expected, you have given a very, I would say, down-to-earth assessment of what is wrong at the moment and what are the things that have actually, perhaps we have slipped back over time in this matter. But I just wanted to bring to you one point that, talking about correspondence in other countries, even in the region, there are so many restrictions on journalists in their movements. So even if you post a correspondent, how and where does he or she go? So ultimately what happens is that the temptation here of those who are footing the bill is that what's the point of sending a person permanently to a neighboring country, paying in dollars, and then hardly getting any news that's different from what the agencies have already filed. So I think there is something we should actually, editors should apply their minds a little more, and this is something which will have to happen from all sides of the picture. If I think correspondence from India to other countries, other SAARC countries, and from other SAARC countries to India, actually in India there are hardly any restrictions on this, but in many of our neighboring countries, unfortunately, there are restrictions. In India, yes, there are restrictions in one or two places, but otherwise fairly free. So on these matters, I think we also have to apply our minds and see how these restrictions can be eased, so that we get the news from our own people rather than depending on Western sources who are allowed fairly unfettered travel, and we ultimately take those copies or those reports in television. So I think this is something we need to apply our minds on. But more of that later, maybe in the discussion period, all this will come up. So now I will leave, Mr. Saleh? Not yet. 1 o'clock, okay. May I now invite the representative from the geographically smallest member of SAARC, the Maldives, from the Maldives, Mr. Ibrahim Waheed.
Thank you, Mithraji. As you can see, don't let the size fool you. The guy is from a very, very small country. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just here on a learning curve, so let me share with you some of the things that I've learned during this conference. So thank you, IDSA, for the opportunity. And as Brigadier Rumal Dahiya said, sometimes commercial considerations cannot come in the way of peace in this region, and I totally and wholeheartedly agree with you, sir, on that one. You know, as our chief guest, the Honorable Minister, did say, the poor class now has aspirations. And talking on that issue, all of us, I think we watched the opening address on video. There was mention of newspapers turning into viewspapers. And I'm going to take that away with me because I think that opened up the door for perhaps looking at media from the sidelines, perhaps even from the bottom up. As my honorable friend from Pakistan, Rasul Baksh Rais, mentioned that Pakistani journalists often viewed the West as serving democracy when it serves its interests. The question that immediately rose up in my brain was this, but don't we all do that? Don't we all do that? I mean, don't we all talk about democracy only when it suitably suits our needs? I mean, could we ask ourselves this question when we write about something? And that goes to this place where I would hesitate to go, but I think I should. Do we sometimes need to consider the quality of the journalists that we get? And I will quote my friend Syed Badrul Ahsan, with your permission, sir. Anyone who cannot get into diplomatic service, government service, or academia find themselves in journalism? That, I believe, is the truth, and straight from a practitioner's mouth. Perhaps this is something we should take into consideration. Perhaps we are the gurus of everything. Are we? Have we been rejected by academia or all sorts of different services? Was it you, Dilrukshi, that said about media ownership? Was it you? Papa, give me a TV channel? It was you, yes. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kaberi. My friend Kunda from Nepal, I'm not going to misquote you here. Are journalists guilty of this? Fear of inadvertently telling the truth? That was from you, sir. This is us speaking. If we are media people, about ourselves. Seriously, I don't consider myself a media person. I've dabbled in it. I still have my TV program on television Maldives, but that's another story. Lakshman Gunasekara, my friend. Where is he? He just left. Well, when he said that the product is the audience and it is sold to the advertisers, is that the truth? Is that a home truth that we got to face? Let's assume for a moment that we are the readership. We are being told to a bunch of capitalists out there by the media. Is that a home truth we got to face? And then we have had this thing. Throughout these 2 days, we talked bilateral issues. And very often we were talking about how we view each other. And again, I think I owe this one to Kaberi from Bangladesh, who pointed this out. Our school kids, those in secondary school and up there, how do they see the rest of the world? How do the Bangladeshi kids see India? How do they see the Maldives? Apparently in Bangladesh, they see the Maldives as a country with climate change problems and nothing else, despite the fact that at any given point in time, the Bangladeshi expatriate labor population in the Maldives would sometimes equate the population of the country itself. Despite that, the perception there is this: oh, this is a country undergoing climate change. So is every other country, believe me. You see, we come from a very, very small country. But what we have to realize at the end of the day here, and this is a message going out to some of the bigger countries in this region. It just happens that the Maldives is also very strategically located right in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And with the China equation coming up, I think it's time we sat up and paid more attention. Having said that, we also still say this, we play this card. Hey, we got one vote in the UN, and we can still play that card as well. Perhaps we should also bring up this issue. Have you heard of this? That a little butterfly flapping its wings somewhere out there in the Amazonian jungle actually can set off a chain of events which will eventually lead up to some sort of hurricane or something right up somewhere near Hong Kong. You've heard of that one. We've all heard of that. But you see, my point here is this. When we talk about the role of media in promoting regional understanding in South Asia, shouldn't we address some of these questions that I've just told you about? Should we first look at ourselves, find out where we're coming from, who owns us, who drives us, who's got the yokes on us? Are we qualified to do this? Do we know everything about everything, as we sometimes pretend to? Do we need to look at ourselves first? Or are we kind of like some kind of aircraft, where when passengers board, they have no idea where they're going? They have no idea what the captain's up to? They don't even know if he's up there? Or is it more like commercial aircraft, where you know where you're going, you get on board, but you know the captain's sitting out there, but most of the time the guy's not flying it, he's doing it autopilot. And when you're landing at something like Mali International Airport, short runway on its own little island, you don't even touch the controls when you're landing, it's all instrument landing. Are we that? On autopilot all the time? Subservient to the powers up there whom we don't even know, who own the aircraft or the airlines? Are we that? Or do we owe it to some sort of audience? Hey, wait a minute, let's all sit up and look at this. Perhaps, just like they said that someday the pen would go out of fashion, just like they said that illuminated text written with quill pens would go out of fashion when the print media came out, perhaps it's time we sat up and thought. Media houses that own newspapers, TV channels, radio channels, when are we going to face up to the reality that this thing called the internet has now put the ability for even the smallest man out there to set up his own blog? And believe me, there's a saying in the Maldives, the fish go where the water is. So if you serve up the truth on a platter, perhaps your customers will come to you. Please do sit up and listen. This is a huge guy from a small country talking. But maybe IDSA has got it right when it put the Maldivian flag up there on the top of the heap. So much for that, when it came to your logo. Because at the end of the day, the reality is this, and this is where India got it right when it put it up on its insignia, these words. And this is the truth. You will have to face it, because sooner or later, truth will have to prevail. Satyamev Jayate. Thank you very much.
Your sharp and incisive critique of the media and the need to turn the mirror inward from time to time to ask ourselves what we are doing, whether what we are doing is right, whether we are compelled to do certain things we ought not to be doing, and so on. Of course, these are perennial questions which we have debated and will continue to debate, I fear, for a long, long time. Mr. Lwin, you are sitting there, but you are one of our speakers listed. May I invite Mr. Myo Lwin, please excuse my pronunciation. I don't know how it is exactly pronounced. So, but please come and speak to us.
Thank you for inviting me to make some comments about the conference in the last 2 days. And actually, I don't have much to say, but when we have to make some comments about this today's theme, reminds me of Indian professor from the Indian Institute of Mass Communication told me at one time about the problems or the sophistication of the manipulation of media in India. Actually, I am not expert in the media in India, either India or Pakistan. I know something about the media in Myanmar. But most of the audience in Myanmar in the broadcast industry is the BBC. BBC is quite well known and then much respected. And then when I asked the professor from the Indian Institute of Indian Communication of Mass, Indian Institute of Mass Communication, what do you think? What is your comment on the BBC? He told me that it is the Blast and Blaster Corporation of England, something like this. So that shocked me. So when we are, as I told yesterday, the media in Myanmar is still very young, and we have the capacity program problems, and we have the new information access from the government and the stakeholders. So I would say that the media in Myanmar is still young, and then talking about the regional understanding is, it's in my opinion, it is a little more than we can reach. It is a little bit out of reach, I would say. It is my own opinion for the media in Myanmar, because we have been even trying to make our coverages more and more professional. So the media in Myanmar is still young, and then the capacity building for the young journalists is an urgent requirement. And what I would like to mention a little bit about is the media owners. And the media owners also need to run the business more professionally, more properly, so that they are running the business in a more profitable way, so that when we have to make a judgment between the editorial policy and then commercial concerns, they can do a better job. So this is the two requirements that if we can promote in Myanmar, the role of media for the better understanding or promotion of the regional understanding of South Asia will be improved. This is my conclusion. Thank you very much.
For media that has only just emerged, really, in many senses in Myanmar, and I'm sure that neighboring countries, including India, which has a fairly developed media, would be able to kind of welcome you in this capacity building effort. We have two more speakers to go, and total of 20 minutes for this session. So kindly divide it amongst yourselves. I'll Suhasini has another event to attend, so although I had intended to keep her last, but anyway. No, Mr. Kunda Dixit. Yeah, Suhasini, television anchors always have the last word, although she is no longer a television anchor. I think the habit will persist. Mr. Kunda Dixit.
Thank you, Chandan. I think I'm going to go ahead and completely contradict myself from what I said yesterday at my panel. I think we've been whining a lot about the media, and we journalists have been whining a lot. We are complaining we don't have the attention span, we have the superficiality, we're sensational. But that's the nature of the beast. We knew it when we joined the profession. And we just have to work within those rules. Try to change them if we can. We have to infiltrate the system, but it's not going to change on its own. So coverage will be politically top-heavy. It will be concentrated on the perimeter of the national interest. It'll be governed by national interest. You can't force a media in a country to go and be interested in some other part of the world where there is no strategic or economic interest. So if that's the nature of the media, we, smaller countries surrounding India, should not be really complaining that India doesn't give us enough coverage. Of course it won't. India is obsessed with its own domestic concerns, and it's a huge country. South Asia is like a solar system, I keep saying. India is the sun, and we're the planets orbiting it. We are pulled by its gravitational tug, but we have our own little gravitational pulls as well. So why would Nepal get more coverage than it's already getting in the Indian media? It would if, as is happening now, 4 or 5 large mega hydro projects that are funded or with Indian investment being built in Nepal come online in the next 5 years. There is a lot of economic activity and trade and investment going on between India and Nepal. Then Nepal will be covered in the Indian media. It'll happen automatically. But as things stand now, when things are so politically, economically stagnant, it's futile to complain that the Indian media doesn't write about us. And of course, we also forget about our own domestic media's role in poisoning or worsening relations. I think if you read the Nepali language press, especially the political ones, you would have the impression that India and Nepal are actually at war or something, or that India is micromanaging to such an extent Nepali politics that we have absolutely no say in it. And this is not just detrimental to India-Nepal relations, it's detrimental to our own self-esteem. And I think a lesson learned from all this is how Prime Minister Modi's visit to Nepal earlier this year managed to completely reboot the hard disk on India-Nepal relations. And in just one speech or one visit. How was this possible? I think it's a very interesting case study. And some researchers maybe should do it. And maybe that can be replicated with other neighbors as well. Is how you plan your interventions, your speeches to parliament, your spontaneous street walkabouts, so that there is a perception that the Prime Minister of a neighboring country is being overwhelmingly and spontaneously being received. It may not be the truth, but that's the perception. And if TV, live TV, can get this message out, both in the host country as well as in the country of the visitor, then you create the perception. Someone in the earlier session talked about shaping the narrative. Well, Prime Minister Modi shaped the narrative proactively. And not for us. He did it obviously for India's national interest. But we stand to benefit from it. So, as they say in public relations, perception matters more than reality. And the perception is that India-Nepal relations is now back on an even keel. It's stable. And it's got to the point where public opinion is so favorable to India at the moment that it's politically untenable now for our leaders to succumb to the temptation of bashing India. So India has turned from a bullying big brother to this benevolent Daju, benevolent elder brother. And the joke in Nepal after the visit was that if Modi ever stood for elections in Nepal, we would probably vote for him. So we've been discussing actually that the theme here in this session is how does media impact on foreign policy? Actually, I think we should be asking, how do foreign policymakers shape the media agenda? I think it's the other way around. For example, Professor Modi just said that he writes op-eds. Lots of your ex-generals and ex-diplomats write opinions in the papers. And now with social media, you have political leaders tweeting and Facebooking all the time. So it's not just us journalists who drive the content of media. We have to understand that. It's you. You are all part of media. You're all citizen journalists as well. And you're shaping the agenda as well. It's not just us. And so there's an equally important role for you to steer it towards a direction that's constructive and not warmongering and making things worse. So I think in the end, as I was saying yesterday, I think it's all about what should be our priority. I think it's regional cooperation, so we all benefit. Our country has development and economic parameters that are at sub-Saharan levels. And there's just absolutely no reason why we should be locked into this politics that keeps us poor and unequal and unjust as a societies. So regional cooperation is not just this goody-goody thing that you talk about at SAARC summits. It's actually an economic and political imperative. And that's what it should be all about, lifting the living standards of our peoples. Thank you very much.
Enough of a lecture. Now, actually, there are two more speakers whom I missed out. But before I call them, since Suhasini has to leave, let me call Suhasini, whom we are all familiar with. Thank you. Now with the Hindu.
Thanks a lot, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks a lot, Dr. Mitra as well. I have an apology to make, which is that I'm sorry I missed the last 2 days of your session. I really wish I had heard much more of the kind of views I've heard today. And the other apology I want to make is in advance, because when many of us meet again for the SAARC summit in Kathmandu, we are going to let you down once again. We're going to let down South Asia as an idea, because it is going to get overrun by the immediate problems between India and Pakistan, as several SAARC summits in the past have done. My apology is not going to change the situation there. I think the only thing that will change that situation is if leaders decide to actually take their roles of leadership a little more seriously and stop blaming the media for promoting or not promoting regional understanding, because I, as a member of the media, don't really think it's my job. I don't think that I have a role in either trying to build peace or to go to war. That's not my role. My role is to take on my government, to ask questions about my region, to perhaps educate my readers and my viewers about just what they are missing out by not being a part of perhaps a larger idea. But it's not my job to make peace. It's not my job to make love or war. And that's something that we can always debate about. Having said all of that, and I do want to quibble with Professor Muni, who said that the media does not take the government on when it comes to decisions that don't promote regional understanding. I think every media house did take on Prime Minister Manmohan Singh when it came to his decision not to go to the Commonwealth last year in Sri Lanka. I think it made absolutely no difference to the powers that be and to the government what they said at that particular time. And I think we have to understand the limitations of the media. What is the media's role? The media's role is to build those windows. We're not opening any doors. We're building windows for our readers and our viewers to understand the region we live in better. Yes, South Asia as a concept is only common sense. If you're talking about a market and you have a choice between a market of 1 billion people and a choice between a market of 1.5 billion people, it's common sense to say which one you'd prefer. If you want to draw on a pool of scientists and engineers, is it better to draw from a pool of 5 million, or is it better to draw from a pool of 8 million of the engineers that are known worldwide? You know, you go to any university worldwide and the likelihood of a South Asian engineer, not just an Indian engineer, being at the top of their class is quite high. It's common sense. If you want to manage a river, is it better to cut up that river into a lot of little bits and behave as if rivers can actually be broken up and used upstream, downstream, you know, and measured by the liter or whatever? Or is it better to actually try and jointly manage these resources to the best use for all your populations? I can go on with this list. The basic summation is that South Asia makes common sense, but it is not necessarily just the media's role, or in fact the media's role at all, to be able to, in a way, promote those better relations. What we can do is promote a greater understanding, and I think we fail at that duty quite often. Why do we fail at that duty? And I'm going to try and keep it short, because I was actually hoping that we'd get a few questions in this session. To begin with, the fact on the ground is that linkages within South Asia are abysmal. Why did our Pakistani guests have to leave right now? Because there's only one flight between Delhi and between India and Pakistan actually, Delhi and Lahore, it's the PIA flight that goes twice a week. And there is no Indian flight that flies to Pakistan at all, to any part of Pakistan. Delhi and Dhaka have got connected in the last few years, but how many flights do we have to Myanmar, despite all the promises of the last few years? We still fly via Thailand to get into Naypyidaw, as many of the journalists next month when they go for the East Asian Summit will. I can go on about the actual linkages. How many of us, we are privileged in a sense in South Asia because we've actually seen more than one South Asian country. But to most of the outside world, you will not actually meet a lot of people who have been to Bangladesh, and Indians who have been to Bangladesh or have been to Pakistan or have been to Afghanistan or been to any of these other places. Perhaps Sri Lanka and Nepal a little more because of tourism, but certainly not of the kind of numbers who might go to Singapore or Dubai or any of those other countries. The linkages are poor on the ground. The visas, as Chandan pointed out, are always going to be an issue. They're more of an issue for South Asians than they are for other countries, which again seems to defy common sense as far as I said. I'm very glad that Mr. Ahsan brought up the issue of history. We're all brought up with different histories. How is this possible? How is it possible that history has become so subjective that no two South Asian countries really have the same idea of their own histories when they look back? How far back do we go? Do we go to 1947? Do we go to 1200? Do we go to the year BC? Is there a point at which we understand that there is a commonality and a shared history in South Asia that somehow we're missing out on because none of our history books seem to add up or match up if you were to put all of them into one room? And then there are the internal pressures on the media, which a lot of our participants have spoken about already. The pressure of the TRP, the pressure of the government, the pressure of a different form of government, sometimes a democracy which doesn't run as a democracy, sometimes a form of self-censorship. All of these are issues that we are all well aware of, and each of our South Asian countries suffers from one or the other of them. But I think the largest problem is still the mindset. We don't see ourselves as South Asians, and we don't necessarily see better regional understanding as a given. It's all very well to say more Indian journalists should be read in Pakistan, or more Pakistani journalists should be read in India in times of peace, but where do they all disappear when things are not so peaceful? Why is it that for the past month, very few Pakistani channels and very few Indian channels bother to bring on what we call the peaceniks, i.e. the non-warists or the anti-hawks? We don't. All channels run basically various shades of the same point of view, which is that somehow or the other, the subcontinent that has not solved one, problem with war is somehow going to find that elusive solution in war. The problem is that we had a major national daily that actually, is the country's leader, put on its front page a story that began thus: even as the guns were blazing at the LOC, members of India and Pakistan's journalism and former, retired army personnel were actually meeting at a Track 2 summit in Dubai. It was horror. My question to that, and a member of your party once asked me that on a television chat, was, when do you expect us to speak? When the governments are speaking to each other? It's basically the mindset. And I don't want to make this about India and Pakistan because, as I said, we've already committed that we are going to disappoint you when we go to Kathmandu next month. But the truth is that we do not have that mindset that will take us towards that South Asian destiny just yet. When we talk, Nitin, I think, was speaking about the fact, not just of an attention span, but the fact that we don't follow a story. And I completely agree with Mr. Dixit when he says that Prime Minister Modi's speech in Kathmandu changed the entire atmosphere. It moved the temperature, from, minus something to a really warm point. But are we going to take that same amount of understanding a year down the line, when those roads that have been promised to be built are not actually built, when the joint understanding between the two countries has not been taken, I could ask in the next week, are we going to ask our government, are they going to go through by listing in Parliament the understanding with Bangladesh when it comes to the land boundary agreement? The problem is that mindset, that we are still really thinking about our own countries. We're not thinking about a South Asian destiny. And finally, there is a sense that the media somehow should not just have a role, as your subject suggests, in perhaps promoting regional understanding, but the media somehow should be actually the government of the countries. We are each of us identified by the most establishment or extremist point of view in our countries. Years ago, I had this ridiculous situation in Pakistan when I went over to speak to some college students, and we finished this, and there was a Q&A session, and the session seemed to be overrun completely by the story of a parrot. And every one of those students over there wanted to ask me, but wo bichare tote ne kya kiya tha? In Hindi, they said, what did that poor parrot do? I was completely flummoxed. I had no idea what they were talking about. It turned out what they were talking about was a story they had seen on some Indian channel that had been picked up by all Pakistani channels and was running as a headline, which essentially was about how a parrot, which was the Indian equivalent of that octopus, had picked Pakistan to win in the World Cup cricket that was being played between India and Pakistan. Pakistan lost, but worse, the parrot had its neck wrung. And this somehow was the big story in Pakistan about India. I just looked at them and said, is this how you really think, we are? But the truth is, yes. We judge each other by our most extremist and our most establishment positions. And I think this idea of conflating the media constantly is what leads to what Mr. Dixit called this whining or self-flagellation, because I think we have in South Asia a lot of media that we really should be very proud of. But we shouldn't mistake that to mean that they can take on a role that, frankly, media should not be expected to take on. There is just so much that we should do. And finally, I just want to end by saying in this past few months, we have been taken to the heights of optimism and the depths of despair when it comes to South Asia. We started this new government's reign with a wonderful South Asian moment. I'm not sure how much of that we can salvage by the time we get to the actual SAARC summit in Kathmandu. But the truth is, it has to be beyond that. When India and Pakistan have issues at the LOC between each other, when they trade charges between each other, it does not behove the media of either country to ignore civilian deaths on the other side. It means that we have not moved in all these years of SAARC summits and all these years of conferences such as these to actually be able to see each other as humans. And I will leave you with that last thought that was given to me by a journalist I respect, when he said that in times of conflict, more than in other times, we have to remember who we are. And journalists have to remember that they are humans first, journalists next, and citizens only last. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Suhasini, for a most engaging and speech, and it's really, again, turns the mirror inwards. We have two more speakers, and we have actually run out of time. So I'll call upon both of you after this, and with a request that keep one eye on the watch. Mr. Dawa Penjor.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be very short because a lot of what I would like to speak has been spoken by my predecessors, and it makes my works much easy. So, but nevertheless, I would like to delve on some of the points that I've said earlier. One thing is how actually media can be responsible, especially when we're talking about understanding of South Asia. We have diverse perspective here on the forum as well, where some feel that the media is not the sole the agent or responsible agent that can bring change. But at the same time, there have been different thoughts where actually media can play such a role that if it can be used in a negative way, it can poison the minds of the society. So here you have, how do you create that balance? I believe we have a lot in commonality, the South Asia. We have a lot to harvest history is what we are all bickering about, our past. We are still in the past, going on and again and again. I think the media has a role to shape the history that you want to hand over to our future generation. And I think that is very important. What is important is the present. Past, we learn from it, the mistakes that we have created. That's why we know about history, we learn about history. That's the reason what we have to do. But the present is very important. At the same time, the present will determine our future. Therefore, I think the media plays a very crucial role in actually charting that discourse. It is the responsibility of our individual governments to give those policies, make those frameworks, build strategies, but more importantly, to implement those actions where we can have better interactions, where our journalists from our neighboring countries can come without visas, come travel around freely, so that we create more understanding about the region. I think that should begin from the government itself. Secondly, I would like to share this with Mr. Professor Muni, that actually I did talk a bit about SAFMA, the roles of SAFMA in this regional understanding, and actually how it can be harvested further. SAFMA has functioned well so far, but it has been modest. What it has done, tried to do in the past, with all the shortcomings, it has done its best. But this is not the point where it has to retire. If you look at the chapters, local chapters everywhere, the SAFMA is almost at the low key right now because of financial constraints, because of individuals. Now, how do we reinvent that? How do we give a re-emphasis on that regional body so that we don't have to create another one? We don't have to invent a new wheel. We have to just invest on the same wheel. I think it should be not just the government, but individuals, starting from the media houses, journalists, who has to come together and build that regional body further. It also is the responsibility of the media as media houses and as professionals. How do you deliver and assure that at the end of the day, it's not the story of the journalist or your face on the television or your picture on the newspapers that is important. It is the story of the people that is more important than anything else. If you want a society, an enlightened society, who would work towards contributing peace and harmony, it is important that you reflect their stories. It is not important as a journalist to show your face. We now, with the advent of technology and internet, you want to showcase yourself more than the real stories. That has been what is happening. Lastly, I would like to say, with internet and technology, we have immense potential where we can harvest. In the past 2 days, also, the fact that there have been initiatives like Aman Ki Jang, Maitri Bandhan, and romancing the borders on social media. Such activities should be harvested. We should encourage more and more of those projects, more of those prototypes, so that we can increase our interaction, increase our understanding, and see a better South Asian society. So, lastly, I would like to end saying that it is not the responsibility of one individual or the media alone. It's a collective responsibility. So, today, can we pledge that when we go back as a journalist, as a policymaker, as someone, as a family member, as a father, as a mother, that you, in a way, share to your near and dear ones, at the same time, through your channels, through your print media, better understanding of the South Asia. And also the fact, I believe, change begins with oneself, and only then you can see the change in others. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Say a very important element in the discussion today, the element of sensitivity and emotion. Without sensitivity and emotion, a complex problem of this kind that we are discussing cannot, we can't really move forward. unless we have a commitment and a passion towards it. Thank you for your thoughts. And now our last speaker from Sri Lanka. May I call upon Dilrukshi Handunetti. Again, sorry if I've mispronounced your name.
There was a reference mentioned to cooperative enterprise, media being a cooperative enterprise. Clearly there is no magic formula. If not, we wouldn't have had this discussion for 1.5 days, and still we really come up with conclusions that might even help us move forward perhaps. What I want to do is just give in 3 bullet points what I may want to suggest. I speak as someone who has worked in the region, across the region for the past 20 years, and I think it's been an absolute privilege to be working in South Asia. So primarily, though I work in a national context, I consider myself a South Asian journalist. I have even worked in Myanmar, so it's a privileged position to be in. So 3 things I would like to mention would be a couple of ideas for the region, the regional bodies, some of which already has been mentioned, and the state itself, and the 2 other ideas for the industry in our respective countries, because individual practitioners work within those parameters, within our countries, within our regions, within the industry. So the first idea is about SAC. Already the role of SAFMA has been mentioned, whether it has delivered, whether it has been effective enough, SAFMA being associated to some extent with SAC. But whether SAC has been an enabling body to the extent that media has been used. I don't like the word tool and instrument. This was discussed extensively in the morning. Not to call media a tool or an instrument, but a vehicle to convey some ideas and to build regional understanding. So can that be an idea that we want to take home, a role that SAC can play to promote regional understanding using media as a vehicle? Of course, about regional connectivity, a lot of us who are here had to go because there are flight issues and then the visa regimes. I am coming to India within these 2 weeks. I will be here thrice. So then my multiple visas are not granted. So because my passport says I'm a journalist. So issues like that, there was something. There was supposed to be something for SAC journalists, and there was a limitation on the number of visas that they were issuing SAC journalists. So things like that can facilitate us, because there is nothing like going to a place trying to work from there. And if I sit here and try to write a story on Myanmar, my understanding is going to be completely skewed. But it's very different when I work there, sit there and work with local journalists, and it enhances my understanding. And there is I don't think that anything can replace that experience of working in a place. And some of the regional bodies, SAFMA is only one thing that I want to mention, but beyond that, there are different things, because we are also fortunate to live in this age where there is a lot of technology, and we are using new media in a big way. So also there are platforms which are virtual. Dawa just touched upon it. I just want to elaborate on it a little more, because there are platforms which are South Asian, which are online, which are not necessarily, there are no physical infrastructure per se. So all of us can look at the nexus approach than the silo approach, looking at our countries. Our country-specific issues are very important, and country-specific reporting analysis is very important. But beyond that, there is that nexus. How would I report on India and Nepal, and what things would connect me to those countries, and the commonalities? There is a lot that we can do better. And I speak as someone who has done this to some extent, modestly, because there are portals that are for South Asia. There are publications, there are online platforms which promote this kind of content generation. And I know some of you contribute to that. And I'm talking simple journalistic practice that can help us move forward. That will also help us go beyond that portrayal of as a diverse, volatile place and a troubled area. Of course we have our multiple issues, but beyond that, there are lots of things that can help us go beyond the biases, go beyond the narrow politics, and reach a level of understanding. And the good news is that it is actually happening. And whether yesterday I think there was somebody, I think Smriti mentioned that, okay, we have this great South Asian dialogue, but then we also have to put our own content out. Nobody really comes and takes it, which means if you were to look at words, there is a issue about the industry practitioner as well. And do we look at all these this information, this knowledge that is available, do we look at it and do we try to seek and absorb something from it? The last one is I want to mention is about, again, the industry and the market. Believe me, South Asia is a huge market, not just India and Pakistan, and that content that can be sold to Al Jazeera, which I do, but there are lots of other stories from climate change to industry to economics that you can actually practically share. And there is a little bit of transboundary reporting that is happening. So there are reporters, journalists, analysts working in different countries, working on the same issue. Can we practically share that, have an exchange where those ideas, what we produce, our content, can be shared and published across those countries, so that we understand, that I will understand Bhutan better and someone will understand Sri Lanka better, instead of just giving out that very contentious story. The political stories tend to be very skewed and contentious, but there is life beyond that too. There are issues. For example, if we are affected by climate change in different ways, no matter what our politics would be, we are affected, and that is something that we need to deal with. And the last one is for the journalist, the practitioner, because I spoke about the region and the state as well as the industry. Understanding the market, that the market is there. There is a market, and we need to understand that market dynamics and cater to that. Because as everyone has been saying since morning, if you don't understand the market, you cannot put your content out, and there is a problem. The individual practitioners can actually influence in-house policies and practices, and this again I speak as someone who has done it, because I work for a newspaper that has a South Asia page, and probably the only one in Sri Lanka that has a South Asia page. And the market understanding is that that content is read better, people respond to it, which means people like those stories, and that means there is hope. Thank you.
Must thank all the participants and speakers, because there was a danger that we would slip into a lot of the usual homilies and the same points would get repeated over and over again. But I'm very glad that every participant has made an attempt to give something new in his or her presentation, and I think when this is compiled, you will find a lot of points emerging from this which deserve to be taken up in much greater detail as we go along. The problem of being chairman is that, you see, by the time the chairman's time comes to sum up or say something, the time is up. So I will not, hold on people. I think all of whom some have to leave, some are obviously hungry. So I will not take up or use my prerogative to say anything except one issue which I just want to flag. And this is going to actually, I fear, stay with us for many, many years to come. We've today, and generally whenever we talk, we all tend to praise the role of the social media and the new channels of communication. I myself also mentioned to you that it has made journalists of all of us, and it's a good thing. But there is a downside to it. The downside is the misuse of the social media to foment discord and spread disinformation. South Asia, we all know, is a very complex society with a lot of strife that goes on in almost all countries, barring one or two. South Asia is, as somebody said, dangerous place, but more than dangerous place, it is a place of great deal of struggles and contention that are going on here and are likely to go on for some more decades. In this, when there is disinformation spread, as was done about 2 years ago with regard to false photos being put up, and in a communally surcharged situation, see, they were put up from one country, flowed into another country, created an ethnic situation in India. And this can be replicated, examples can be replicated. I don't want to cite, I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. And this may happen again. So I think as journalists, the responsibility is to counter this kind of disinformation and the misuse of the social media. I think we must be proactive as and when it happens. It hasn't happened too many times, but we have to always keep that caveat in mind. The social media is helping us, it is creating greater understanding, but there is a danger that it may also create very deep-rooted misunderstandings or promote further misunderstanding. I think as journalists we should all be aware of that. I just thought I would leave that one issue to be flagged, and all that remains is for me to thank all of you, and we're very happy. I personally enjoyed the discussion a great deal. Thank you.